The Genestealers Cult has joined Tacticus, and their first member, Magus Xybia Kheiser, becomes the 81st character to join the game. Today we'll look at whether they should be infiltrating your team or just sent to rot in the Temple of Lair. The first Genestealers Cult member has arrived on Tacticus, and for those of you who don't know who the faction is, they are a Xenos-worshipping secret society, and they are horrific. The cult begins with a single Genestealer, a patriarch, that ensnares their victim with a hypnotic psychic gaze, and then gives them a lovely French kiss with their tongue-mounted ovipositor. This implants a genetic cancer with them that permanently rewires the victim's brains so they adore and venerate the Genestealer. It also ensures that any children they will have incorporate the Genestealer's DNA, and I'm pretty sure I've dated a few people like this in my past. From there, the cult begins to form, the victim has children, and their kids are hybrids, more alien than human. The Genestealer and its small circle of worshippers then continue to expand both by hypnotizing other pure humans as well as reproducing and giving birth to more hybrids. As that first generation of hybrids grows and reproduces, their children are more and more human, to the point where the fourth generation of Genestealers are barely distinguishable from the host species. When that fourth generation sires children, they give birth to new, pure strain Genestealers, and the cycle begins anew. And while all this is going on, the cult slowly expands into human society, infiltrating and bending as much of its social structures as it can to their ends. They start with the underworld, exiles, outcasts, and criminal gangs, and then slowly work upwards into labor gangs, factories, and guilds, before attempting to skewer agents within the world's ruling classes. When they eventually launch their coup, a great many dissatisfied, rebellious elements may throw in with the cult anyway, either not knowing or not caring about their alien heritage. And Xybia is one of these Genestealers. This Magus always acts as the Patriarch's vizier. That means it's basically the primary enforcer, propagandist, and diplomat to those outside of the cult. They are also the head of the alien monstrosity's deviant church. And in that position, Xybia is a powerful psyker, and their formidable will is enhanced by the powers of the Star Children, until they can manipulate enemies' minds and bodies like puppets. And just note, the Star Children shouldn't be confused with the Star Child in Warhammer 40k lore. I don't know why they're called so similar, but to be very clear, when we are talking about the Star Children in relation to Genestealers, we're simply talking about the Tyranids. The Genestealers Cult calls the Tyranids Star Children, as well as other grandiose titles like Father's Fathers or Emperor's Angels. So it's a really weird group, this one. Let's see if Xybia is a weird one as well. As always in this series, we're going to take a look at 3 different things: how long it roughly takes to level him up to Diamond 3 when compared to other characters, his traits and general usefulness, how good he is in legendary events, and I won't be looking too much into his usefulness in guild raids or tournaments, as I leave that to our other wonderful content creators. So let's dive right in. Xybia is unlocked in the usual character release event. This one is the Path of Ascension event, and it starts on October the 13th, so you should be able to start getting them very soon. It sees you collecting Ascension points by completing missions, which are then converted into synthesized germ seeds. These allow you to open industrial crates, which have the Path of Ascension shards and other goodies within them. These shards can then be used to unlock Xybia, and you can see the missions on screen now. If you need help with these missions and getting the best possible start, then definitely check out my beginner's guide to character events, which is linked in the description below. Basically, if you play through the tournament arena and spend 110 blackstone per day, we will definitely be able to pick up each character at Epic 1 level without the need to purchase any additional packs. And in the meantime, if you want to earn some free blackstone to help you on your way, you can use my Referral Code in-game today to get 100 free blackstone. Just note, you can only use one Refer a Friend code, so make sure you make the most of it. And let's start by looking at roughly how long it takes them to level from Stone 1 to Diamond 3. The reason I say roughly is because my sheets don't take into account all the extra ways you can get free energy, like in the tournament arena, nor getting items gifted from your guildmates or from the daily shop. It also doesn't take into account any hard to get items that haven't been added in lots of places yet, but even with all that in mind, it's always interesting to see how they compare to the other characters. Now, there's a notable change in these patch notes that impacts leveling of characters. With the addition of a new mercy system, it means that the overall effective chance of getting campaign rewards, and those are the common, uncommon, elite, and legendary upgrades, as well as the character shards, have changed. We can look at the table to see how those changes impact things at the basic level. And this is a complex table, but basically it tells you the new average success rate for getting an item, the energy cost depending on which campaign you play, and finally the average energy cost to get that item, which is the important part for us. And we can see the improvements from the old table to the new table, and there are quite a few of them. But how does that impact our overall leveling of characters in a real way? So let's take 3 characters and assess them. We'll take the hardest to level currently, who is Certus, and he takes 44 days to go from Stone 1 to Diamond 3. We'll take a mid-range character to level, so Azrael, who takes 38 days, and the easiest character Lucian, who takes 33 days. And after the changes, we can see that Certus now takes 43 days, Azrael still takes 38 days, and Lucian still takes 33 days. So, the difference is pretty much negligible in reality. This is not a change that's going to make or break your leveling. In fact, it's barely going to move the needle at all. So what about Xybia? Where does she fit in? Well, interestingly, they're not the easiest to level. In fact, they come in at 72nd position. They take 35 days to go from Stone 1 to Diamond 3, so although this is a pretty easy champion still to level, it isn't the easiest, and this makes me wonder whether the Genestealers were actually meant to be released earlier this year, but never made it out on time. Who knows? If we look at the graph, we can still see them over there on the right hand side, and it takes Xybia 3 days to go from Stone 1 to Bronze 1, another 2 days from Bronze 1 to Silver 1, 4 days to Gold 1, 13 days to Diamond 1, and then 13 days to Diamond 3, which of course adds back up to the total 35 days. So, as with most recent characters, it is still worth considering them from this regard, but let's see if they have anything worthwhile in their kit. So let's start with the traits. Xybia is a Xenos character. They have a Psychic 2 melee attack, and they have a Psychic 2 range, 2 hits ranged attack. Xybia has a brand new trait called Ambush, which leaves a decoy token the first time that Xybia is killed, and if one decoy token is still on the battlefield at the start of the next turn, then Xybia is resurrected with full health and can immediately take a turn. Very cool. As expected, Xybia is a Psyker, which means that their ranged attacks also deal 50% damage to adjacent enemies to your target. Moving on to her skills, her passive is Spiritual Leader, which is in the spawning category of skills. After moving, they place a decoy on an empty hex. There's only one decoy dropped at the end of her movement, so you don't get multiple decoys for moving multiple spaces. Then, if there are 2 or more adjacent decoys, they summon a Neophyte hybrid on one adjacent decoy. Also, if Xybia doesn't move, then this ability triggers at the end of her turn. One thing to note with the decoys, if Xybia stands on it, then it just moves it into an adjacent space. However, if an ally or enemy stands on it, then it's removed from the game. The Neophyte hybrids that are spawned are quite interesting in themselves. They look very similar to Cadian Guardsmen, especially for a colorblind person, and also suffer from battle fatigue. They do have the Ambush trait though, which means that they have a chance of reviving. Because of this, they have a little bit less health and armor than the Cadians, although they do 5% more piercing damage. And should this be prioritized as a skill over others? Most of the time it's the same thing with spawning skills. I always prioritize these when you're new into the game. Her active is Mind Control, and this falls into the buffing category of skills, and this has a really big utility to it, because it's going to force an enemy within 3 hexes to be taunted by an ally adjacent to it, and when picking an ally, it always picks the one with the highest health. The enemy unit deals less damage and takes more damage, so you can really lock up an enemy with this skill. I already have a great idea on who I'm going to be locking them up with, so see if you can guess before we get to that stage in the video where we talk about teammates. Should this be prioritized as a skill over others? I wouldn't prio it over other skills if you're a new player. This is definitely something for later. So what do I think about their traits and skills? Well, I think it's plain to see that with all the first characters for a new faction, it's really difficult to understand how they're going to play in reality. I do think as a Psyker, they are not bad at all. I like the fact that they've got 2 hits with their attacks rather than 1 like most of the other Psykers in the game, but she is pretty squishy, and you won't want her to be getting into the battle too much. This is definitely someone you want on the back lines. I really like her mind control ability, I think for Tournament Arena or Guild Wars, this might be a really powerful tool. It definitely gives you a lot of opportunities for tying up an enemy while you work around the rest of them. The Neophytes and new decoy system is also very cool. It brings a lot of really smart tactical play into the game, and that's something I'm always really looking forwards to playing about with. In terms of the modes that they fit into, we'll need to check their legendary events usefulness shortly, but as a Psyker, I expect them to be useless. Usually Psykers are, and this one doesn't even fit into the one-hit category. They're squishy, and although they can spawn a bit and revive, it's very temperamental and not great when you're overwhelmed by enemies who will be squashing the decoys easily. For guild raids, it's difficult to replace any of the current people, and she doesn't really bring anything that's going to buff, heal, or out DPS the others. For Tournament Arena and Guild Wars, I do think there's a place here for her in the right team. I think that they're likely to get steamrolled by the meta teams, but outside of that, I think they could do okay with constant spawning and taunting. So it's not my personal highest pick, but I think you could consider them as a fun side character for sure. So who do they work well with? So obviously we're missing some other Genestealer Cult characters, and as you've seen recently, most of the new releases this year have a great synergy with their own faction. So much so that we've seen a new faction-only Tournament Arena coming out very soon. That is going to be super interesting to see how it works. But in the meantime, I'm definitely going to be picking up something that maximizes the spawns and her taunting ability. So first, I would have Commissar Yarrick to full the battlefield some more and to give friendly units extra battle fatigue damage. Just note that Yarrick will happily execute a neophyte if they try and flee, but that'll leave a decoy, so maybe that's not a bad thing. Whenever I have Yarrick on the field, I will always have Castellan Creed. I really love this character, and even though they don't have much in terms of synergy with Xybia directly, they do with Yarrick, and that means more spawns. After that, I'll be looking to add some beef to the team so that I can taunt someone. Personally, I just love Marneus Calgar here, as they can buff the spawns for damage, as well as just being another big lump to soak up damage. Brother Jaegar is going to be fun because they have their own taunt, and with another taunt they could be parrying and countering a heck of a lot. My favourite choice is going to be adding the wonderful Galatian in here. If anyone dares stand next to them, then I will be amused if this hulking mech just laughs as they try and chunk through their massive amount of health and armour at later levels while Xybia has taunted them down. So I definitely can find some fun here with this character, and I'm looking forwards to seeing what the rest of the Genestealers bring to the action. Of course, they absolutely fall to the side against the most meta champions, and I understand that makes this a difficult pickup, but honestly, if you want to be controlling the battlefield and having a bit of fun with it, then they're not the worst champion at all. So moving on to the legendary event scores, let's see how they do. But before we start, just a quick note that with the recent changes to Boss Golgorts and Snapareka, it has changed their overall positions, and so I think we need to take a little deeper dive first. For Boss Golgorts, the important changes for legendary events are that the melee hits was reduced from 5 to 2 and the ranged from 3 to 1. For the Karn event, he's added to the Alpha track max 1 hit, but he's removed from the Beta track minimum 3 hits battle. So this increases his score by 30 points overall in the Karn event, and that brings him up to 455 points. In the Mephiston event, it isn't so positive, as he's removed from the Beta minimum 3 hits battles. So overall, I think it's easy to see that there's a real case for Boss Golgorts to be someone you want to be leveling for legendary events in the future. For Snapareka, their melee hits was changed from 2 to 3. This isn't quite such a positive set of changes from a legendary event perspective, as the only difference is that they no longer appear in the Mephiston Alpha track minimum 2 hits battle. One final note, there's actually been a bit of a buff to all Terminator characters, as they now take 75% reduction on all damage against them from the first attack rather than the first hit. They also can't be suppressed, which means that it's easier to chase down Thaddeus Noble. For me, this makes Toth even more important, as he'll be a very tough character to take down. But let's see where Xybia fits into legendary events. As the Vitruvius event is now completely finished, we'll start with the Karn event. In the Alpha track, they appear in the ranged battle. In the Beta track, they appear in the no Terminator and no big target battles. And in the Gamma track, they appear in the no mechanical and no flying battles. And this gives them a score of 185, which is pretty poor. Moving to the Mephiston event, in the Alpha track, they appear in the minimum 2 hits and psychic battles. In the Beta track, they appear in the no big target battles. And finally, in the Gamma track, they don't appear because it's no Xenos allowed. And so Xybia finishes off with a poor score of 160. Moving on to the best teams overall tab, we will be able to see how she ranks versus the other characters in legendary events. With the Vitruvius event gone, we have a new leaderboard, although it's only temporary until the Patermime legendary event joins us in November. And so, as with most other psychers like her, she comes in pretty low down in the scores. She is way down in 74th place. It's pretty expected given her lack of traits and 2 hit ranged ability, and this holds her back quite a lot for legendary events. For the new top 10, it's currently the following: Revas, Aleph Null, Calandus, Vindicta, Imospec, Morgan-Ra, Snapareka, Athana, Makotep, and Ulf. It's good to see Ulf sneaking on there, but let's see how that next legendary event changes things up. Make sure and hit that subscribe button and look out for a video on how to plan for Patermime's legendary event, which will arrive just after the first event is completed. So what do you think of Xybia? Is this Genestealer Cult Magus going to steal your heart? Or will she be joining your other ignored collection of Xenos sitting at Stone 1? You can check her out right now in the latest version of the Google Planner Sheets linked below.